What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, daily Black Masculinist news. Hope everybody's well. And I hope many of you brothers out there are enjoying your Father's Day. I hope you are being honored as you well should be, even if it means honoring your damn self. Which in our community, you might need to. Because, this is the only community I've ever seen where the women actually compete with the men for who should be honored on Father's Day. Absolutely ridiculous. Nevertheless, wanted to acknowledge the day with a special Father's Day edition of the Black Masculinist news for the day, and hit you with a couple things that ran across my desk. Now, first and foremost, shout out to a brother named Chuck who sent me a very interesting book. He didn't send me the book, but he sent me a notification of an event, a community book reading that I thought was incredibly important. And the event actually happened this past Friday, the 18th, 2 days before Father's Day. And basically what it was a public book reading of this book here, Anna Malika Tubbs, Three Mothers, right? How the mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin shaped a nation. I want to be clear here. I called this video the Assassination, right? The Assassination of Black Fatherhood. And the reason I called it that is because there are several different metaphorical assassinations happening, at least as I see it. First of which is what I named a moment ago, competition with Black men over who is to be honored on Father's Day, and the extent to which I don't see any other group of women making such arguments. That's the first. But the second is what I see here. Now, the framing of this book is pretty consistent with what's going on in the academy, especially as it relates to Africana Studies, right? This attempt to reframe everything via a feminist lens, right? And basically what that means is that it does not have, it's not to be honored unless it's done as a Black feminist work. And so when I talk about that, let me be clear on what I mean by by Black fatherhood in this instance. I'm talking about what I usually talk about, the sacred Black masculine. There are different ways we can frame this. The sacred Black masculine, right? The sacred Black father figure, the Black male image. They're all really the same thing. Because understand something. King, Malcolm, and Baldwin represent a great deal for many of us, especially as it relates to Black masculinity and Black manhood. Most particularly, yes, King and Malcolm. Why? Because they represent the father figures in the Black community, the sacred father idea, most particularly Malcolm. And that's because we associate the father with discipline, direction, hard truths, tenacity, right? And of course, we see that with King, although with King, we tended to see it very much so the last couple months of his life, where people feared him more than ever because he began to break from convention and challenge and question things that we had not heard him do earlier in his life. But here's the connecting fiber to all three of them in the sacred Black masculine as it relates to the Black father: fearlessness, a certain challenging of the power structure with fearlessness. All three of these men represented that in our imagination. They personified the Black father, especially as it relates to fearlessness, speaking truth to power unapologetically. Now, age even plays a role here. Now, neither Malcolm or Martin reached the age of 40, which is incredibly powerful because it means that they had to be so brazen in their speech that to represent the father and not even reach the age of 40, because we associate fatherhood with elderhood on one level or another. That speaks volumes. But Baldwin, we did get to see become an older man, right? An older man who was internationally known, well-written, and spoke out very aggressively about the ways in which racism has shaped how the Black world is seen, perceived, and dealt with, even from within. These three men represent different qualities and aspects of the father. Malcolm, the disciplinarian, right? Martin representing the church tradition in a certain respect, but also representing this appeal to a certain type of righteousness, and of course, representing a certain type of sacrifice in nonviolence. Now, it's not so much a matter of whether you agree with nonviolence or not, but maintaining that kind of perception in the face of violence became very much a part of how, in many ways, we saw that particular tradition. And then, of course, when it comes to Baldwin being unapologetically critical, but almost to the degree of a surgeon when it came to understanding the white mind, the Western mind, and how racism functioned. But my point is, with all three, they represented different aspects of the Sacred Father, the sacred Black masculine. And when you look at this book, the way it's framed in and of itself attempts to transfer the accomplishments, the sacrifices of these men, and make it a somewhat product of their mothers and how they were raised. And this is a feminist, gesture. It's pretty consistent, right? Because we can't have Black men venerated. And this is an event that was hosted by Ilyasa Shabazz, Malcolm's daughter, if I'm not mistaken. And this was held, as I said, June 18th. And it was thrown by Delta Sigma Theta. So you have a sorority of Black women, Malcolm's daughter, and an event about the three mothers that raised these men held 2 days before Father's Day. That is one of the ways that I'm referring to the assassination of the Black father or Black fatherhood. This could have been held on Mother's Day or something along those lines, but to actually identify Father's Day is an outright statement about the erasure of Black fatherhood, even if it's only metaphorical, but it is what it is. So we have the fighting with Black men over who should be honored. We have the metaphorical attack on Black men in regard to this book and actually putting this book up on Father's Day to be, the framework, to be the point of discussion, as opposed to actually honoring the men in question, dismissing them and bypassing them to honor their mothers. Interesting. Would have actually been perfect on Mother's Day to do, but no, we're going to actually do it on Father's Day because screw you, Black men. Now, the other thing to notice about this is this idea of venerating the Black mother. Venerating the mother, ironically, is very much a patriarchal idea. Much like a few years ago at the Democratic National Convention, when we saw the mothers of slain Black boys, slain Black men on stage. No attention to the fathers whatsoever. But that venerating of the mother, see, we can identify with that in the Western mind because it takes us back to Victorian notions of European femininity, where women are inherently pure, inherently good. Therefore, any tragic loss on their part can be empathized with simply because they are women. This is why they were placed on stage and stood shoulder to shoulder to be honored because of their son. It wasn't really about their sons' lives. It was about them. And we're seeing that same idea here, a veneration of the mother at a time when we're supposed to actually venerate the father, but we can't have that. Why? Because we live in a gynarchy in the Black community. Any overt acknowledgement of men has to be supplanted. It cannot function. It is considered wrong-headed. It is considered inherently misogynistic. Why? Because it doesn't reinforce the veneration of the mother, or the sacred feminine. So we have another metaphorical attack. And notice, just like I said with the Democratic National Convention, there was no acknowledgement of the fathers. Do you see any acknowledgments of the fathers on this cover? The Black father has to be made to disappear. And really, we didn't really see the disappearance of many fathers from the household until the 1970s. Right around the time that Black women got complete control of birth control, as well as the family court. Child support, alimony became features in Black family life. The number of marriages began to dwindle, especially for men in the mid-60s, for women in the mid-70s, as women gained complete control of the family and its production. And what did they do? The moment they got policy control, the moment they got birth control, they sought to control and eliminate men. And men became useful only in terms of sperm donation, child support, occasional protection, recreational sex. But the objectification of Black men became standardized in this period. We became walking phalluses. That's why I used that term in the closing of my show, because that became the perception of many Black men, and it still is. So here, where we have the veneration of the mother, it is used at a time when we are generally honoring the father as a very purposeful and strategic act. to supplant the father, which is a supported gesture in the Black community. It really is. I will be reading this book. I don't like to make analyses of books I haven't read, but I had to in this instance, mainly because of the event that was thrown and how the subject matter was framed alongside the title and the cover of the book. The framing of it, symbolically speaking, says quite a bit about the perception of Black men, where they fit, and whether or not they are valued. In this instance, they are not. Their value has to intrinsically go to the women that raised them. I don't know much about Baldwin's parents. I did recently see a video clip interview of his mother. It was a couple weeks ago. Martin's parents, I read a little bit about years ago. Father's a pastor, mother, very intelligent. I read a little bit about both of them. And of course, many of us know about Malcolm's mother and father, right? Father was killed under questionable circumstances. Mother apparently literally went crazy, and it was understandable, right? Didn't get the life insurance that, they had set up, had to struggle with multiple kids, I think 5 altogether, and eventually had to be committed. So we know a little bit about some of the parents involved here. But the thing I'm saying is, at least for 2 out of 3 of these men, their fathers had a lot to do with who the man they became. A lot. Is it any accident that Malcolm's father was a Garveyite? Right? Garvey was pushing for a return to Africa, a certain type of pride in Black men. Did that have no impact on Malcolm, do you think? Or Martin's father as a pastor, prominent, outspoken in his own right. Did that have any impact on the man Martin became? Pastor and theologian in his own right? No. You have to shift the energy. So that was the first part. What's the second? Well, recently I watched Kevin Hart's Fatherhood. Came out on Netflix same day as the event I just got through talking about. And when I talk about the assassination of Black fatherhood, again, I mentioned it in several different ways. The competition with Black men over who's to be honored on Father's Day, right? The elimination of the father with the book, the 3 mothers, the elimination of the father in terms of the assassination of the idea of these 3 men as Black male fathers, sacred father symbols, and supplanting their accomplishments by suggesting that it's a product of their mothers raising them a certain way, while eliminating their fathers in the process. That's 3 different ways I talked about Black assassination. Well, this is the 4th. This particular film wasn't bad. I mean, I'll just say this. As a performer and as a comedian, I've enjoyed Kevin Hart in different instances. Some not so much. Night School, I think it was called, I had a real problem with. I did a review of it on my blog a couple of years ago. He has a certain type of self-deprecating humor that I've come not to like as much as I've grown into my own masculinism. That I think is problematic, and it's predicated on the stereotype of the trifling Black male. He plays off that trope quite a bit. And in this film, he tries to make one of several dramatic turns. He did so with another movie a couple of years ago. I think it was with Bryan Cranston, and he played, aide to Cranston, who was a paraplegic, I believe. The name of it escapes me. I wasn't planning to talk about it. But that said, this is one of several attempts on his behalf to transition into drama. And I don't think he's necessarily a bad actor. I think he could take some cues from like Robin Williams. And you look at something like, what was the one he did with Matt Damon? Right. I know you guys already know what I'm talking about. I didn't plan to go there. But anyway, when you look at films like that, with Robin Williams, you can see how Robin kind of made his Good Will Hunting, right? Very little humor, a little bit of humor, but very little humor, and really a kind of deep dive into drama. I think Kevin here could have done a little more drama. The comedic moments are to be expected, but that would have been a good reason not to do them. I wanted to see a little more drama from him, but it wasn't necessarily a bad performance. I'm not saying that. Not. Kevin is growing as an actor, and I think he has a lot of potential as far as that. But here's the thing. The film really did emphasize the absence of the father idea. And one of the ways that happens is, okay, so obviously, spoilers. If you don't want to know about the film, you might want to stop this video here. But this is a Netflix film. And basically what it deals with is one of the things we see with the three authors. Now, the writers of this movie, there's a Jewish gentleman, there's a white woman, and another white male. Apparently the white male, whose name is Matt, I'm not going to pronounce his last name properly, but Matt Logelin, I think it is. Logelin, I'm not sure. He actually in real life lost his wife, while she was giving birth. We got Dana Stevens, who's the white woman I mentioned, Paul Weitz, and then Matt Logelin. And Matt is the one who actually in real life apparently lost his wife at childbirth. And that's what this film deals with. It deals with a black male whom I think should have been more involved with the writing, but that's just me, who loses his wife during childbirth, or right after, really, right after them. So the child is healthy, little girl, as you could tell. And after she's born, the mother suffers a surprising kind of response to the whole situation and passes away. And it was an unexpected delivery. I think they were on vacation in Hawaii pretty late in her pregnancy, and they said it was best that she get a cesarean right then and there. She did, and so on and so forth. Loses her from there. And then there's this question of him having to raise his daughter alone. Now, this is something I can speak to. Much of this film was something that I've lived, and that was hard. There were moments that I had to pause it and just meditate for a moment. There were some hard moments for me because it brought some things back. I mean, mainly, when I lost my wife, my son was 4, so it wasn't newborn. But other than that, there were still elements that were very similar. Going into a hospital and never seeing her alive again, those kind of things, being a single parent, raising a child from a very young age. He wasn't even in kindergarten yet, he's preschool. Those kind of things are there. The kind of anacratic structure you run into when you're looking for support as a parent, and most of the things you find are designed for women, and women tend to be very clear that you're not welcome in those spaces. Many of the structures in place for childcare, whatnot, are really geared for women. Hell, even the daycares I went to, I was charged a different amount than the women were, strictly on the basis of being a man. They were even told about, different opportunities to cut the costs. I wasn't even told about them, right? So there's very much a sorority of sorts among women when it comes to parenting and the structures involving parenting that even single male fathers are not immediately privy to, unless you got some kind of a hookup. And I didn't. I had moved to Fresno. I'd only been here like a year, a little more than a year, and she passed. So I had no friends, family here, and it was just my son and I, which is a scary thing, because if I so much as got into a car accident on the way to get him from daycare, there was no one that could come get him. Those kind of things, stayed on my mind. And it was good to see some of those things represented in this film. Some of those elements were very much a part of single parenthood, single fatherhood, to be particular. But before I lose my way, so this is a film about a black father raising his child from infancy by himself. And one of the things he quickly runs into in trying to figure this out, they start with the funeral. Well, they don't start with it, but that happens fairly early in the film. And I thought that was very powerful. I could relate. His mother-in-law is played by Alfre Woodard, who as an actress, I've always dug her work, so she plays a very powerful matriarch. And, when you live in a gynocracy, you understand you're going to run into several matriarchs. And there were several scenes in this film that were very reminiscent of that, as well as my own experience. Even at the funeral, I remember these conversations coming up about whether or not I should raise my son alone or give him to someone else, advice about what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. The only difference between Kevin's character and myself is, aside from being, a bit in shock, which I think he actually played well. He he was probably a lot more diplomatic than I was about some of that. But anyway, listening to these matriarchs tell him what to do, he was much more savvy than I was. I got very, confrontational about that, because there's no question in the world that I was raising my son. And it wouldn't have mattered to me if it was a daughter. That's just not a question. I got this. And I'm not saying it was easy. There's a lot that I had to learn, because men are not generally socialized from boyhood into being fathers. We're socialized into manhood if we're lucky, but not necessarily being fathers. Girls are socialized into being mothers very early on. So it's a very different experience to become a single parent overnight. For a father is different. We have to make different arrangements. We have to make different transitions in our mind state than women generally do. And it's not something that's supported, right off the bat. Not even in society, not even in terms of its policies. It's not something that people readily identify with. If you say you're a single parent, or if a child says, I have a single parent, most people assume mother, especially in the Black community. So fatherhood is not really the go-to interpretation here. Nevertheless, there were plenty of moments where, he had his mother-in-law in particular, who was really a problem. She was really controlling, confrontational. She assumed the worst, and she basically treated him like he was trifling. The majority of the film. And like I said, he was far more diplomatic than I was, or would have been if I was presented with the same exact situation. I did have, there were family members on both sides that expressed issues about me raising my son alone. And I gave them no opportunity to exploit any frustration on my part, or even the feeling of not knowing what to do, which I think any parent would feel if they lost a spouse with a young child in tow. Still, his character, really didn't confront that a lot. He kind of accepted it more than I was comfortable with, but whatever. I think that would have been a good portion of this as far as the writing, because there's a tension with Black men and women. There's a tension with especially Black mothers-in-laws and sons, son-in-laws. There's a tension in the Black community on gendered grounds, whether we want to say so or not. It really, they touched on it, but they didn't know how to follow through on it. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that none of the writers were Black, for that matter. And really, even if they were Black, they probably only would have known how to address it from Black women's vantage point. Black males' vantage point in this regard is still pretty new. Most people don't know that. I will give credit to Kevin in terms of him being willing to even lay some of those issues out. But I don't think he knew how to follow through on them, because he's not part of a discussion with Black men on articulating our frustrations and our response to the gender tensions in the community, especially as it relates to child rearing and single fatherhood. But I applaud him for putting it on the table. He had some funny moments. He's got his boy in the film with him, fellow comedian Lil Rel, who I think is hilarious in general. And there was some tensions there about, what happens when you're single, newly single, after having been married and having a child, and, all your boys are still single, and trying to relate the two lives. You're still trying to hang, you're still trying to support one another, but they don't really understand parenthood. They don't really even understand married life. And yet they're trying to be there for you. They explored a little bit of that tension well. Frankie Faison plays in this film. Many of you may recognize him from a number of projects, but if nothing else, he plays the landlord in Coming to America. So I know you probably will recognize him from that. He plays the husband of Alfre Woodard's character. In many ways, he represents to me kind of dominated man for the most part. She's very much the matriarch, and he very much defers to her. And so when you get advice from those kind of men, it can be a bit of a problem, because there's a new voice for Black men, and it doesn't really jibe well with men who played that subservient role to gynocratic matriarchs. So it's a different tension there as well. Very subtle. You generally, a lot of Black men respect, male elders, but how far that respect goes when they played these subservient roles is a whole nother conversation. So that's another part. Because There's a woman named DeWanda Wise who plays a love interest in this that, absolutely gorgeous chocolate sister. I'm gonna look out more for her. I've never seen her before. But anyway, that said, the tensions there, I think, were pretty significant. They tackled well the problems with dating as a single parent and trying to integrate your child, when to integrate them, how to integrate them, to what extent. That was an issue, I know, for me, dating while being a single. I mean, I was looking for a mother for my son. I could say many of the women I dated ended up being very indifferent to my son, and they were sometimes mothers, and that surprised me, the extent to which they would center themselves and their children and even just look at my son like he was an unwelcome appendage of sorts. I didn't expect that, because I think I had assumed this idea that women were all, natural born mothers, right? And that, even if I'm single and I'm a widower and I marry, or get with a woman, or whether she has kids or not, she'll be a natural mother. And they kind of play that in this film with DeWanda Wise's character, Swan. She naturally takes well to the little girl. And there may be a difference in the fact that it's a little girl and not a boy. I'm not going to, double down on that, but I have to at least say that's a possibility. But from the things I witnessed and the women I dealt with, there were a few of them that were really quite indifferent, even though they themselves were excellent mothers to their own children. My son was a bit of an afterthought, and I remember being a little surprised about that, and sometimes being very hostile to him. There was actually only one woman that took well to my son over a long period of time. Not necessarily to me, but she took well to my son. That said, they did bring those issues up a little bit, but they focused more on him trying to acclimate to that. And it didn't help that the woman he, started to date had the same name as his wife. And I can understand how that would kind of jack him up. They dealt with the tensions of Black fathers in schools, except this was a little different. Mine was in a public school in a predominantly white area. Well, yeah, predominantly white, but becoming more of color, if you will. His has to do more with a private Catholic school. And so you had to deal with dress requirements and things of that nature, and the tensions between the nuns and him as a father. Why there's a scene where he's wearing a skirt didn't fit anything else in the movie, really. I can't say. This is one of those decisions Kevin makes that he's a little out of step with the conversation going on amongst Black men, but it is what it is. Let me see. There's a moment where the little girl wants to actually live with her grandmother. And I've not experienced that, but I had a good friend that did. And I know it broke his heart to hear. And it becomes difficult to, remember that this is a child, and a child, doesn't always know what's best for them, often doesn't know. And it can be difficult to remain in that mind state while dealing with what this child is saying to you. So when they, got to that portion of the film, he's understandably heartbroken, as was, a boy of mine that went through that. And that was a difficult kind of, moment. I didn't really deal with that, because I didn't tolerate any of that. It wasn't happening. You are my child. I got you. And that's another element I would say that the film did deal with, pretty well in terms of what I've actually seen men do. One of the things Kevin's character does with his daughter is he lets her kind of mother him in a way, which I don't agree with. There's this way we do this with little girls. Boys, not so much. Fathers and boys have a different relationship, but a lot of the time in real life, I'm not talking about film, I've seen fathers who end up kind of dealing with their daughters like little grown women. And you get to this point where you even see these little girls mothering their fathers. And I'm like, stop that shit. She's a child. Father her, parent her. Do not let this girl mother you, please. She needs to understand what it is to be parented and what it is to be fathered. And his character does this. There are moments of that. I don't take to that well. There's a certain amount of back talk, even with this child who's, even at the age of 5 or so, that I just, no, I don't do it. I don't deal with that. I know a lot of people take that sass and back talk to be cute. I don't play that. No, you're not grown. You don't talk to me like that. I'm not one of your friends. And I'll be quick to say that. And I don't play that. But a lot of times I see that in these films, and I see that in real life, where when it comes to girls, I'll see fathers kind of overly allowing for that and allowing her to mother him. And I'm like, y'all need to stop that shit, But anyway, so there was an element of that I really, it was uncomfortable, but I can't say it's not realistic, as far as that's concerned. There was a moment where, there were several moments of tension with him and the mother-in-law that you see in this photo. I mean, she, of course, loved her daughter a great deal. In some ways, blamed him for her death. I dealt with a little bit of that. Talked down to him about his capacities, about his abilities to father, which show up unannounced because she had little faith in his abilities. Those kind of things I've dealt with as well. He handled it, again, far more diplomatically than I did, but that's within the realm of believability, so I didn't really have a problem with that. One of the things I did notice they did well in the film is there's a point where the little girl is spending the night at her friend's house, and the mother is putting her friend to bed and tucking her in. And you see the look on her face, watching what a mother does. It's not just a simple being jealous of your friend because they have a mother and their mother is mothering. It's really also mixed with, like an almost kind of quizzical study of like, oh, that's what mothers do. Really almost anything a mother does becomes an opportunity for reflection because it's not something you've seen when you're in her situation. I've witnessed that with my son. I mean, I can tell you every year of elementary school was really rough on Mother's Day. None of the kids could conceptualize not having a mother, whereas for my son, he couldn't remember what his mother was like. And that became very difficult. And we had to find ways around that that were hard. And so it took a lot of creativity and sometimes a lot of just pure endurance on both of our part to get through that. So teachers would kindly have him make out, they do art projects and stuff, and he'd make out projects for me on Mother's Day and Father's Day. I was more concerned with how he took it all, being the only kid there without a mother. That was rough. And it can be difficult to love a family member and try to protect them from the world and yet not be able to. I went through the same thing with his mother. I mean, we lost 3 pregnancies, right? One of whom was over, 6 months along. She had to actually deliver my daughter after my daughter had died. And I can tell you from that moment on, we could be watching TV, and if there was a show about to come on about a mother who lost her child, or even just a show with, mothers and children, I had to somewhat, find smooth ways to distract her and change the channel, because otherwise she'd be in tears, or we'd be taking a walk and you'd see a woman walking her baby with a bassinet, and man, by the time we got home, she's on the floor crying. So there are ways that you have to sometimes kind of protect those you love from the world until they're able to deal with it. But that can be rough. It can be really rough. So, those kind of moments with the little girl, pondering motherhood and whatnot, those are challenging. But when I talk about the assassination of Black fatherhood in regard to this film, Kevin's character, who plays Matt in the film, he actually has the same name as the white guy who co-writes the film, Matt Loughlin, I guess. But his character was very much a product of Kevin's self-deprecating humor. Again, a humor rooted in the triflingness of Black men. There's a strong, consistent theme of that, and it's kind of mixed into a very believable self-doubt about being a single parent after the death of a loved one. So that's what makes it kind of interesting and nuanced in a way, and problematic at the same time. There's a self-doubt that is legitimate, but it's mixed with Kevin's particular brand of humor, which doesn't necessarily have to be self-deprecating. It doesn't have to be. And when I say self-deprecating, I'm not even just talking about him as an individual. I'm talking about him as a Black male. His character is deprecating about his own sense of Black maleness in regard to being a father. That's what I took issue with. There are many of us who are single fathers And we are not self-deprecating in that regard. It doesn't mean we don't have moments of doubt, but there are many that are far more sure-footed, at least in intention, until you develop the skill to actually act it out. And I wanted to see a little more of that sure-footedness coming into the character. I didn't. So in this particular film, I think one of the drawbacks to it is the extent to which he kind of makes space for everyone else and really almost kind of apologizes for his very existence in a particular way. And this is purely my assessment. You may see something different. I welcome your comments. And I hope that we can have a conversation in the comments about the film. But for the most part, these are the things that I kind of see. And I think and this is probably a statement more about Kevin Hart as an actor in general and a lot of his film projects. I want to see him become far more sure-footed in his Black manhood, at least in terms of how he represents himself. I'm not saying who he is as an individual. I don't know the man, but I do know the characters he plays are very deferential to women, right? Very deferential, very unsure, very self-deprecating, as I said, very kind of, lacking in direction. And I want to see him become far more sure-minded as far as that's concerned. And I think that's the case here. Now, that's been consistent across a lot of his projects, but when it comes to Black fatherhood in the wake of such a tragedy, it would have been a nice addition to see him grow into that, at least. He tries to, but I don't really think it comes across as well as it should. But anyway, I look forward to hearing your thoughts. But again, on this Father's Day, in this special edition of Black Masculinist News for the Day, I want us to be mindful of the various ways that Black fatherhood is under attack. Thematically, metaphorically, I want us to think about that. This would have been a great weekend to see a film about a father who sure-footedly grows into or steps into his responsibility and does so while grappling with self-doubt, but unapologetic about his intentions. It would have been good to see that a little more forthrightly. It would have been good to see some pushback against, having this review of this book, The Three Mothers, 2 days before Father's Day. Out of just pure respect for the Black father idea, the sacred Black father, the sacred Black masculine. And in essence, if you don't remember nothing else, what I'm saying about both of these things and this whole question of who should be honored on Father's Day is revering and re-acknowledging the sacred Black masculine is ultimately what I'm saying needs to happen, because it directly affects the Black men that are in our lives every day, the Black boys even. Consider it. Hope you guys are well. Hope you enjoy your weekend. Happy Father's Day.